say the game is getting old. Monday morning and your coffee's cold. Life is not what you want it to be. You need another chance to be who you are.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to A New Direction. My name is Jay Izzo. I say it every week. Holy cow, do I have a great show, and I'm not making this one up. I don't make any of them up. I mean, that's kind of what I do here. You know, I do this show, right, and I get these amazing guests who write these amazing books. And, you know, they're from all over the world, right? It just happens to be that my guest happens to be just down the road from me a little bit, and he has written a #1 bestseller on Amazon. It is called Actualized Leadership. For those of you who are watching live, and I know you Castbox FM live folks who are joining me live right now, I know you can't see the book, but it's called Actualized Leadership, Meeting Your Shadow and Maximizing Your Potential. His name is Dr. William L. Sparks. Oh, man. If I listen, I know that when you hear a leadership book, first thing that we do is our eyes open up a little bit wider and our ears perk up and go, oh, leadership, I like leadership, right? And then I'm going to tell you, then what happens is you kind of go, oh yeah, leadership book. Well, you know, there's so many leadership books, right? This one, Actualized Leadership, is like none other. I am telling you right now, I have read this thing. I have read it on my Kindle. I have read it on the paperback that I'm holding up here. I have read it. It is absolutely amazing. It is life-changing. This is more than a leadership book. This is about you. This is about you changing you. This is about, well, he'll get into it, but listen. Do you remember Star Wars? Okay. Remember Star Wars? You know, we had this dark side, right? Remember that? The dark side, right? We had that, you know, right? Darth Vader and that whole thing, right? In the old Star Wars, right? And then, we had the good people on the other side with Luke, right? And we find out that he's father and everything, and really it's kind of all jumbled up there and everything. We're going to deal with the dark side of leadership, right? We're actually going to deal with the dark side of you. And he's going to, and Dr. Sparks is going to call it shadow. But you know what? Let's not get all into that because he's going to want to talk about that. And we're going to deal with the dark side, and it's going to be fun, and it's going to be awesome. And I'm going to tell you, I don't care if you are 9 listening to my show or 90, you're going to grow from this book, okay? Because that's what this book does, is it's going to help you grow and become the person that you always dreamed that you could be, the person that you've been intended to become. That's what this book is going to help you do, and he is absolutely fabulous. He has a great sense of humor, and he's also an unbelievable psychologist, and it's going to be awesome. But let's do what we do every week, right? Let's check in, right? I believe that we are 4-part people. We are physical people, mental people, emotional people, and spiritual people. And I believe that all those things have to kind of work together, right, to make us the whole person, because that's just that's what we are, right? So let's talk about where you're at out there today on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being miserable, 10 being outstanding, 5 being average. All right, how are you doing physically? Give yourself a number. What do you think you are out there physically? Are you feeling like I'm just kind of average, you know, or are you feeling a little under the weather? Maybe you're feeling like a 3 or 2. Maybe you're going, you know what, Jay, I feel okay, but I'm a little short here because I should have worked out and I didn't, or, you know, I haven't exactly been eating right? So whatever that number is, what is that number for you? And then the question becomes, well, what can you do to change it right now? What is something that you can do right now? What is it that you could do right now to change that number? Right? I mean, there's always things that we can do. You know, it can be taking a walk. Matter of fact, you could be listening to this show, taking a walk. Maybe you are. People who listen, you know, in 35 countries around the world are listening to the show, and it's like, well, maybe you're out there walking around. Maybe you're listening to me on the beach somewhere. Great. Awesome, right? Getting a little exercise, good for you. So you got that number somewhere between 1 and 10, right? You got that number, and then how do you get to the next number, whatever that number is, all right? Good for you. All right, let's look at the second area. We're talking about the mental area. What do I mean by the mental area? Well, we have 2 halves of the brain, right? We have this right side, which is our creative, fun side, right? We like music, right, and that type of thing. That's kind of that right side. And then we have that Mr. Spock logical side, right, on the left side of the brain, right? And we really need to feed both halves of that brain. Right? We really, really do if we want to be a really whole mental person. So what are you consuming? What are the things that you're consuming to help grow both sides of their brain? Right? And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can listen to shows like this. You can read. You can take up a musical instrument. You can do all sorts of things. You can learn a new language. All sorts of things that you can do to help yourself grow. But the real big deal for me is this, that you're growing, okay? And that you're consuming good things, right? Not bad things, good things. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 miserable, 10 outstanding, where are you at this week? Right? You feeling like you're mentally, you know what, Jay, I've been reading the books that you've been telling me to read, and actually I've been good. Good for you. What does that make you, 7? Well, then how do you get to 7.5? Because, the higher we go up in the scale, the harder it is to get to the next number, right? Because it's hard to get to a 10, right? It's really difficult. So sometimes you just can't get from a 7 to 8. Sometimes you just go to a 7 to 7.5. So what are you going to do? What do you need to change in order to get yourself into that next mental level? All right, so we've got 2 numbers, physical number, mental number. Now, the third number, scale of 1 to 10, 1 miserable, 10 outstanding. Where are you at emotionally? And we talk about these things like emotional quotients or emotional intelligence, right? We talk about those things and kind of feels it's a little, what does that really mean? Well, basically, how well are you able to control your emotions, first of all, right? I mean, do the little things get to you? I mean, do you find yourself responding, just reacting, and all of a sudden all this stuff comes out because you have the inability to control your emotions? Well, that's for part of it. Or how well are you able to tap into the emotions of others? Because that's also important, right? Because how well are you able to understand another person's emotions? That's all part of that emotional intelligence, that emotional quotient. And, you can always work on that. A lot of this is about intention. What can you do to be more intentional about being better with your own emotions? So on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at this week? Right? 1's bad, 10's outstanding, 5's in the middle. Where are you at this week? And then what can you do? What can you do intentionally to change those things? Sometimes just listening can be a great exercise in dealing with your emotions. Instead of opening, you can hear him probably say, you can hear Dr. Sparks probably say, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And, there's a reason for that, right? So maybe that's part of your way of dealing with your emotions. And then finally, the fourth area is the spiritual area. And, this area is the area that people always ask me, Jay, I don't know if that feels very spiritual. I don't know if I believe in the spiritual stuff. And I said, look, you know what? I've got a science background. Okay. I mean, my master's of science and my PhD work was as an experimental psych guy. And listen, I get the whole science thing, but the truth is, can't explain everything. Just can't. Sorry. Science can't explain everything. And I know that there's some of you out there say, well, eventually it will. And I'm going, no, it won't. Because there's so many things that we just can't explain. And sometimes that whole leftover thing that we can't explain, but we know is real. Sometimes you hear a piece of music and it touches your soul, right? We say that, right? And it's because it does something to us that we can't really explain, right? And we can't scientifically explain it, but we know that it does. So the question is, and for some people, it's faith in something, whether it's faith in God or faith in nature or, faith in karma, or sometimes people have faith in themselves, right? But somewhere you have faith in something. I promise you that you do. And you believe that something gets you to the next place. So how is that working out for you spiritually, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how is that going for you, right? And then what can you do about to change that, all right? So you've got these 4 numbers, right? You got a physical number, mental number, emotional number, and spiritual number, right? So you've got those numbers. Now what do you do with them, right? Well, you got to think of them as kind of like the legs of a chair, right? If they're uneven, it's kind of hard to sit in that chair, isn't it? And at the same time, if they're too low, it's really hard to sit in that chair, right? So the whole point is to bring that chair up as evenly as possible, but also to get it to the right height. And we have this book today. It's called Actualized Leadership, and it is by none other than Dr. William Sparks, and he is outstanding. Dr. Sparks serves as Dennis Thompson Chair and Professor of Leadership at McCall School and Business at Queen's University, Charlotte. Concurrently, he serves as the Managing Director and for William L. Sparks and Associates, and as a partner with Peter Browning Partners, providing leadership, team, and board development services to organizations worldwide. He created and validated the Actualized Leader Profile, ALP. By the way, if you'll go to www.alpfree.com, you can actually take the shortened profile, and it'll it's kind of cool. You'll enjoy that, right? And the ALP 360 and the Actualized Team Profile over the last 20 years, he's validated it. He's reliable. It's valid. And they've been translating it's been translated in 9 languages. He's done TED Talks. He's the power of self-awareness. He explores the importance of personal responsibility for self-actualization. He's completed his PhD in organizational behavior and development from the Business School and Public Management at George Washington University. He lives currently in Charlotte, North Carolina, right here in the great state of North Carolina, with his wife, Erin. And so please welcome to the show, and welcome Dr. William Sparks.
Wow, thank you, Jay. It is a pleasure and an honor to be on your show tonight. I really appreciate the very kind and generous introduction.
Well, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for writing this book. You and I speak so much of the same language when it comes to when we talk about people and leadership, and we may not use the same lingo. I think one of the things is that as psychological professionals, I think what happens is sometimes we get caught up into jargon. And I tell people, you don't know how much jargon there is in psychology. There's a ton of jargon in psychology. But we're on this show. What we're going to do is I'm going to go. You know what? It doesn't matter. I'm a behaviorist. You may be a psychoanalytic guy. It doesn't matter. Okay, this show, it doesn't matter. What we're after is how do we get to an actualized leadership. So let's talk about actualized leadership, because I see people are chomping at the bit as they're all over the place here, watching us live on watching me live on Facebook and also on Castbox FM live. And thank you everybody for joining us. And before we go any further, let me just say this: I need to give a shout out to the sponsors of today's show. Our sponsors are, of course, Inline Business Brokers and Advisors. They have been with us from the very beginning, and they have literally helped thousands of clients in the sale and purchase of businesses. So when it's time to sell your business, contact the professionals at Inline Business Brokers and Advisors. You can learn more by going to inline.com. That's ENLIGN.com. And Linda Craft and Team Realtors, no matter where you're at in the world, they can help you find the right expert for your home. And if you happen to be in the Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle Park area, why don't you stop in and say hi and learn why they are the legends of customer service when it comes to real estate. And you can learn more by going to lindacraft.com. That's www.lindacraft.com. And the t-shirt shout out of the week, well, that goes to Tony Fink, who happens to be one of Linda Craft's real estate experts, and he is from Notre Dame, and he was so excited about Notre Dame winning on Monday that he sent me a Play Like a Champion t-shirt, and so I said I would wear it on the show. So here it is, Tony. Here's your t-shirt shout out. And so congratulations to you and to Notre Dame for your win over Louisville and the Cardinals. And we're with Dr. William Sparks and his book, Actualized Leadership. So, Dr. Sparks, I love this book, first of all, but I want to say something about this book that I think that people are going to want to hear, and that is Actualized Leadership actually has a story, and you have this great little story because you got an F.
Yes, I did. I got an F in life.
So tell the story about you and Dr. Harvey and the F in life, because this is kind of the jumping point.
Yeah, this was the where it started for me when I was 27 years old, and I was had a lot of things going right for me, but I was going through a divorce, and I turned in my very first paper to Dr. Harvey, who the late Dr. Harvey. He passed away in 2015. Some of your listeners may have seen or read the Abilene Paradox, which was his great claim to fame, and so he was very influential. In fact, his books were the textbooks we had in my master's program, and so I was really excited to be studying under Dr. Harvey, and I turned in we had to turn in one paper for the entire class, and I turned it in at the end of the semester talking about the transference and codependency that he explores in his story of the Abilene Paradox, but I talked about it in my failed marriage. And long story short, he called me into his office and he gave me an A on the paper after making me wait for 24 hours after he gave out the grades to the other class members, students. And then, but he said, I've got some bad news for you, and that is I'm going to give you an F in life, because while you're correct, your soon-to-be ex-wife is codependent. There's only one thing worse than that, and that's you. You created this dysfunction, and you have the audacity to try to manipulate a clinical psychologist into feeling sorry for you. I don't. And went on from there. So chapter 1 explores that in great detail and with the kind of the dry wit of Dr. Harvey. But without telling me, he was introducing me to my shadow, and I almost quit the program. I thought long and hard about dropping out and moving back down to North Carolina, and thank goodness I didn't. I realized he was right, and owning that and taking responsibility was really a turning point. It was an definite inflection point in my life and has influenced me every day since.
And I felt like that moment was so critical in the first chapter to the entire rest of the book, because I felt that what was happening here with you was that kind of gave you a jumping point, maybe unbeknownst to you at the time, but that gave you a jumping point to really start going, you know what, he actually gave you a gift that you could start giving back to others. And Actualized Leadership, by the way, which is available on Amazon, as well as your favorite bookstore. And it is an Amazon #1 bestseller, by the way. But he gave you a gift in reality.
Absolutely. You could argue, or I can make an argument that it's probably one of the greatest gifts I've ever gotten, and it certainly changed my life. And the reason I included that as the very first chapter in the book was because I'm asking the reader. Its leadership is in the title, and certainly many of the folks that are interviewed for the book are business leaders, although not all of them are. But whether you're leading at the level of an entire organization or at the level of self or anything in between, I wanted to connect with the reader because I'm asking him or her to be vulnerable in the process and to take responsibility. So I have a model of the transformational cycle for personal growth, and I think there are essentially 3 phases: vulnerability, so you can be open to feedback; personal responsibility, taking responsibility and being accountable for one's actions, in my case, my actions; and then forgiveness, and that includes forgiving yourself and moving forward. And so I'm asking the reader to engage in that process, and I think it would be hypocritical if I wrote it from a perspective of standing at the top of the mountain, looking down, offering guidance. And so I'm very much putting myself out there at the very beginning of the book, and trying to mirror the vulnerability that I'm asking folks to engage in. So I'm trying to model that. It doesn't put me in a very good light, but it was transformative for me, and so that's why I try to share that personal story. And every time I do, I get a lot of feedback on that from folks I've never met that have emailed or sent me a message on Facebook, and every time I do, I smile, thinking it's a bit of a tribute to Dr. Harvey as well.
Oh, I think it absolutely is. Now, as part of this story in the first page, and we're going to move on to the second chapter. But before we do that, this is where you introduce to us that there are 3 basic leadership styles, and
yes.
and these leadership styles come with a lot of positives, but these leadership styles also come with a lot of negatives. So why don't you, helping a group of folks who are out there listening and watching, what are those 3 leadership styles? And let's kind of get a quick description of each before we dig into that.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead to chapter 2, but the reason that I think this is an important exercise is because I think today, and I see it in a lot of younger students, we are confusing self-awareness with knowing your strengths and playing to your strengths only. And I think that's one half of the self-awareness equation, but it's only one half.
I agree. So
to truly be self-aware, you have to own the light and the dark. And so I rail against the strength finders culture that we live in because we're missing that part of it. So
wait. Hold on. Well, let's stay there for a second, because I think this is the way the conversation goes. I'm just going to stop you. Right? That's the asserter in me, by the way.
Sure. Yeah.
Don't worry. I've worked through my controlling, arrogant parts of me. I've been working on those, the condescending issues. I've worked through those. Anyway, no. So let's talk about, though, because it is a myth. The myth of, let's just talk about it before we get into these, because I think it really is important that we because there's this whole myth out there that we are really self-aware. And the truth of the matter is we're not really all that self-aware, are we?
Well, no, we're really not. I mean, I think most people lack true self-awareness. I think Maslow and Carl Jung would put that number somewhere around 5 to 10% that are truly self-aware. And so you've got 90% at best, if they're correct, living in what Carl Jung called the fog of illusion. And so this notion of self-awareness, it's more than just knowing your strengths. It's also understanding what Jung called the shadow or the dark side, and where we go into stress. And I'll tell you the way that the world we're living in now is that you can use the word strength, but even using the word weakness will cause someone to bristle because it has a negative connotation, and yet that's the whole point. It does have a negative connotation because it's describing something that is, less than optimal, if not outright dysfunctional. So even the language that we are using today and the kind of a reluctance, because what we end up calling it is an opportunity for development. It almost sounds like something that you would want to have. And so, but make no mistake, it is a weakness. It is the counterpoint to a strength. Jung had a very dualistic view of human nature. For the brighter your light, the darker the shadow, and he was very clear about that. And so, in order to appreciate, and I just think in order to appreciate happiness, you have to know sorrow, or love, you have to know despair, or whatever those counterpoints may be. And I think that the more willing we are to be open to that, I think the better able we are to truly live into our potential. So it is a bit counterintuitive, and that's the point of the book. To loosely quote Jung, we don't become enlightened by pretending to be perfect and only acknowledging our strengths. We truly become enlightened when we have the courage to own our darkness, and in doing that, integrate it so that we can step into our highest potential.
Well, and then there's this, and I'm going to throw out some psychological jargon here real quick, because the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? We overestimate our strengths and underestimate our weaknesses. Right, where we have this tendency to believe that we are just far better than we really think we are, and we don't really know how weak our weaknesses are. And the question then becomes, this is the question that came out of the book for me. I was like, well, how effective? I mean, you may be a pretty good leader, but how much better could you be if you were willing to look at the dark side of yourself?
Yeah, and I think that it's not even just the leader. It's how much better of a person could you be if you gave permission to those around you in your orbit, whether they're in your personal or professional life or both. If you had the courage to say, hey, for example, I have a very high need for achievement, and that means I'm very detailed oriented. I'm uber organized. I have my wife is an off the chart achiever, so color coded spreadsheets for everything you can imagine. And there are a lot of positives that go with that, being very organized and efficient and detailed oriented. But the shadow of an achiever is a fear of failure. And so what the achiever has to guard against under stress is becoming narrow-minded, rigid. They can be risk averse. And in a corporate setting, they're the classic micromanager. And here's the irony in that is if you micromanage, or you let your fear of failure drive your behavior, you're almost guaranteeing that you're going to either step into failure, or you're going to sub-optimize your success. In other words, you're going to change your trajectory. You're going to sort of downgrade it if you're living in this fear-based response. So owning that and being able to acknowledge that allows us to be honest and to have other, the other part is we have to have people that are willing to call us out and keep us honest and say, hey, I think your fear of failure shadow is kind of creeping up here. You're kind of going rigid or pessimistic, and that confrontation allows us to snap out of it. Go, wait, you're right. I need to open, not close. I need to delegate, not micromanage. And so it's a very powerful and very simple process if we're willing to do that. And I think a lot of times either our ego in a personal relationship or the corporate culture in a professional environment, people are just not willing sometimes to be vulnerable and to be open in that way, and it's really tragic in my view, because it just, you inherently limit your potential if you're not willing to be open to both sides.
Well, I by the way, we're talking with Dr. William Sparks, author, best-selling author of this book, Actualized Leadership, and Meeting Your Shadow and Maximizing Your Potential. This is not just a leadership book for organizations. This is about leading you ultimately, and about becoming the best you that you could ever be. As a matter of fact, the subtitle is Meeting Your Shadow, Maximizing Your Potential. And ultimately is, what were you intended to be, and are you being that? And that's really one of the questions at the end of the book that Dr. Sparks talks about. So while we're here, now that we've gone through it, because it started to make sense to me when we said, we do really need to talk about, that we don't want to look at the dark side. But let's talk about now the three styles. Now let's talk about the three styles of leadership, because now it's going to probably make more sense. Let's talk about those three things, and let's talk about the good, and let's talk about the good side, and then the dark side, the shadow.
Yeah. So the model, I'll just quickly give a nod and a shout out, and I know you'll appreciate this as a psychologist. So the model is built on the shoulders of really four giants in psychology. And even though self-actualization is in the title, the primary theorist is Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist who broke with Freud, also had a psychodynamic perspective, but created analytical psychology as opposed to psychoanalytical, and his notion of the shadow, but also really of individuation, which is what he called self-actualization, is paramount to this work, as is, of course, Abraham Maslow, the father of humanistic psychology. Viktor Frankl, the famed author of Man's Search for Meaning, who survived the Holocaust, provides a critical notion that I'll talk about in a moment, paradoxical intent. But the fourth is David McClelland, a deceased Harvard psychologist who was actually was influenced by one of Freud's proteges. One of Jung's proteges, Henry Miller, and identified three motive needs. That there are three different needs that really drive our behavior, and usually there's one dominant in a person. And I've talked about the need for achievement, the achiever style, which is detailed-oriented, very efficient, well-organized, color-coded to-do list or spreadsheets. But the shadow of an achiever is a fear of failure. And so when their shadow is triggered, and things that trigger the shadow for an achiever are things like ambiguity, the gray area, not having a black and white answer, having to think more long term, the prospect of losing, obviously. Those are things that trigger the fear of failure shadow. And so those positive aspects then go dark, so they become rigid, pessimistic, kind of narrow-minded, and they shut down when they need to open up. And so in a corporate setting, that's the classic micromanager. So that's the first style. The second motive need is a need for affiliation, and I call this leadership style the affirmer. And affirmers are driven out of a need for relationships. So the first style, the achiever, is driven out of a need for recognition. The affirmer is driven out of a need for relationships. And these are the warm, friendly individuals that kind of make life and work worth showing up for. So Ellen DeGeneres has been profiled as an affirmer. Charlie Brown is the classic affirmer. Mother Teresa, Gandhi, these are famous affirmers that are very relationship driven. And so they're loyal, they're friendly, they're empathetic. They're always there to support. They're there to care for others. They are the true servant leaders in our organizations, often putting the needs of others before their own. But their shadow, their leadership shadow, is a fear of rejection, a fear of separation, which is a primal fear that we all have on some degree. But for the affirmer, it's more front and center. So a fear of rejection shadow leads to things like being conflict avoidant, sugarcoating the truth, being overly accommodating, self-censoring what they really think or feel, saying yes when they want to say no. These are all classic things that the affirmer often engage in and sometimes allow others to take advantage of them or to kind of take advantage of their loyalty. And the third style is the need for power, the need for control, and I call this style the asserter. And this style, it has some similarities to the achiever, but it's more of the results-driven. So it's not about personal recognition, but it is about longer-term, larger results. And so these individuals like to be in control. They are decisive. They are confident. They're often charismatic. They're very candid with others. They tend to be more strategic. They're comfortable dealing with ambiguity. An asserter may ask for forgiveness, but they're likely not to ask for permission. And so there are a lot of classic kind of leadership traits that you see in the asserter. But the shadow of an asserter is a fear of betrayal. Asserters have a very hard time being vulnerable. They're kind of like the Fonzie, which I actually saw Henry Winkler in an airport a few months ago. In Happy Days, if your listeners will remember that, he couldn't quite say I was wrong. He would almost get it out, but he couldn't quite say it, and that's the classic asserter. So they have a hard time admitting when they're wrong. They have a hard time asking for help. They have a hard time saying I'm sorry. So being vulnerable, they can take themselves a bit too seriously, and so they, under stress, when they feel like they're wrong or they're going to have to ask for help or they feel vulnerable, their shadow is a fear of betrayal, and it kicks in, and so they can become arrogant, condescending, impatient, domineering. They see an argument as a chess match instead of seeing a difference of opinion or perspective as an opportunity to grow or to learn or to just understand a different perspective. They see it as a chess match that's meant to be won, and often won at all cost. And I was a shadow asserter going back to chapter 1, and so I was always very confident in my decision. I was always right. I like to make sure that everyone knew that, and so there was some immaturity and arrogance that went along with that. And it was that conversation with Dr. Harvey when I got the F in life, then I began to realize the ultimate price that many of us pay for that. So those are just a quick snapshot of the 3 styles, the motive needs under each of those, and then the corresponding shadows with each.
We're talking with Dr. William L. Sparks. The book is called Actualized Leadership, #1 best-selling book, Amazon, by the way. Meeting your shadow and maximizing your potential. And he just walked us through the 3 leadership styles. By the way, you can look up your little sample leadership style by going to www.alpfree, that's ALP, which stands for Actualized Leadership Profile, alpfree.com. And you can take it. And then if you want further, you can actually purchase to take the bigger test that has so much more to it available as well. It's less than $100, and it's a complete test, and it's absolutely outstanding as well. But you can take the free little test. I happen to be an asserter, and it's interesting because as an asserter, I don't have all the traits, and maybe it's perhaps because I've done so much self-work of looking at my own, what I call my big black garbage bag of crud that I carry over my shoulder. And every now and then somebody pokes a hole in the back of that garbage bag, and it really stinks, and I have to go look at it and go, what did I miss? Is kind of how I say it in my own little way. But it's really true, because I know that there are times when my pride gets in the way, and rather than being vulnerable, I just choose to disclose, right? Which is just not really vulnerability. I just disclose just enough without feeling vulnerable. I think I've worked through some of the stuff of being really quick to ask for forgiveness. I think when I was younger, I would never ask for forgiveness and take responsibility for it. I still struggle, if I have to be honest. My big struggle is, dang it, I have to be right. And I still struggle with that. My wife reminds me, we joke about it now, because I said, I got to work on this. And I said, will you please, call me on it when I go, am I trying to be right here? And so I make her call me on it, because sometimes you have to just be right. I mean, some of this is that you have to be called on your stuff and be willing to take it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to be, that's exactly right. If you're going to take this journey, you've got to be, and it's easy intellectually to say it now, but when you're triggered under stress, sometimes I regret that, but more often than not, I realize, hey, I need to take a step back, or I need to take a breath, or take a walk around the block, or something like that, or save the email as a draft. That's another big one too. A lot of times feels great to hit send on the message, and then we maybe wake up in the middle of the night and go, that might not have been the best thing to do. So.
Yeah, we joke. It's now become a joke. Because I've said I said, you know what? I am so sick and tired of having to be right. I said, it's driving me crazy. And I said, you got to call me on it. And so now we have this joke. I mean, now it's a running joke, right? Whenever she feels it coming on. And I actually now can laugh at myself about it and go, okay, you're right. You know what? I'm stupid me is feeling like I got to be right. And then of course the other part for me, there's this part of me that is like, I hate to lose, right? I hate to lose. Matter of fact, it took me 2 days to congratulate the guy who beat me in the championship game of fantasy football last year. That's
yeah,
right. I mean, that's how horrible this disease can be, and it really is such a disease at times. And I don't think people really recognize that. You have to take a look at that on another level, because I had to really look at that and go, why is that so important? I know I'm competitive, but why is that it's so important to me? That
yeah,
and right. I mean, because that's the hard thing, because I really challenged myself. I remember sitting in Carolina Beach going, why is it so important to you? Why do you nobody's really making any money on this. Why are you so upset about this? Losing, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a great example of just how every day you can, and I as an asserter I can certainly relate to that very well. I think that one of the things I've learned over the years is that you know I get to choose what tug of war I get into. As my Sicilian mentor, Dr. Dominic J. Minetto, who I dedicated the book to, Dr. Minetto reminds me often that we can pick up the rope and we can get into a tug of war, or we can just step over it. And I think the more self-actualized we become, the more resilient and settled we become. And so I may completely disagree with a person and have a very different perspective or opinion, and just not feel the need to engage in trying to be right, or even win an argument. And I think that's where that's been very helpful for me, because I was always one to pick up the rope and start tugging. And so I can't think of the quote exactly now, but it reminds me of the kind of insecurity screams, confidence is quiet. And so I think about that a lot of times. I think about if I feel myself getting ready to engage or getting ready to trying to be right, is it my own insecurity coming out, or can I be quiet with this and have a deeper sense of satisfaction, maybe, or just assurance in that. And so when I talk about the anecdotes for the shadows, one of the anecdote for the fear of betrayal for the asserter is assurance, kind of the sense of, we don't live in an unsafe, hostile environment for the most part. We live in a fairly safe environment, and so we can let our guard down, and allows us to connect in an entirely different way. But asserters, and I'm one, that's a tall order.
It sure is. We're talking with Dr. William Sparks, his book, Actualized Leadership, and you're listening to right here on A New Direction. And A New Direction is brought to you by who else but our long-time, first-time ever sponsor, and that was Inline Business Brokers and Advisors. Are you a business owner? At some point, you're going to need the services of an experienced business broker. Selling your business is a big deal. It's a huge deal. So make sure you build your deal team with the internationally known experts at Inline Business Brokers and Advisors. Seriously, they are internationally known. And you know what? You can learn more by going to nline.com. That's ENLIGN.com. And check out their Facebook page. You can also check them out as well. And then also Linda Craft and Team Realtors. It doesn't matter where you're at in the world. If you are looking to sell your home or buy your home, Linda Craft and her team can help match you up with the right real estate expert to help you sell that home or find that home. And if you happen to be the Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle Park area, stop in on Six Forks Road. Check them out. They'll give you a free bottle of water. I promise you they will. Tell them that Jay told you to give free bottle, but they'll do it anyway. Matter of fact, people say, please stop giving us water. But check them out, because here's the deal. Here's the deal. They are known to be the legends of customer service when it comes to real estate. They've been doing it for over 34 years. So why not find out why that is? Just go to lindacraft.com. It's LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back with on A New Direction with Dr. William Sparks and his book, Actualized Leadership. So we're going through this book a little bit here, and we haven't talked much about Frankl, but Frankl says something. You quote him, well, actually you don't quote him. You say Frankl, in his Man's Search for Meaning, he focused on the only real power he had as the victim of the abuse that he experienced during World War II, and that is the freedom to choose his response to the situation. And then you go on to say we are free to choose our attitude and response to every situation or person. When we react to others in fear and anger, we relinquish this freedom of choice. And I feel it really spoke to me, because I'm a big believer that we just have choices. And I remember teaching psychology classes and saying, look, you can kick me in the shin. I have a number of responses. I do not, at 6 feet 5 inches, 250 pounds, have to punch you back, right? So I don't have to do that. But I have a choice. And I am not an accumulation of all the things that have happened to me in the past. I still have a choice for all those things. Dig deeper into that.
Yeah, so that's another example of that is that, when we get cut off in traffic, the car in front of us that just cut us off, their bumper is not somehow magically, there's not a string tied to our middle finger that causes it to go up automatically. So, when you get cut off in traffic, some people yell and scream and beat the horn or more, and they cut me off. But actually, we have a choice. We can think, well, maybe they have something really important going on, or maybe they're just a jerk. But we can choose our response to that. When we react, we forfeit that freedom. And Frankl was very clear to tell us that's the only freedom that we have. So, and that's where he and Carl Jung lived at the same time. There's no real evidence that they corresponded, but you certainly see the influence they had on each other. And Jung famously said, "I am not what has happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And he was talking about individuation, which is what influenced Maslow to create the concept of self-actualization. And so, Jung's kind of laying the groundwork, and in fact, Maslow cited Jung as kind of the forerunner in the humanistic approach of, instead of looking at what's wrong, let's look at what's right with individuals and kind of how those that live into their highest potential. And so, I think that quote about we can be a victim, or we can choose to take responsibility and live into our highest potential. There's a famous book called Escape from Freedom by Erich Fromm, who was also a psychoanalyst, Freudian trained, one of the psychiatrists in the Vienna Circle, and his book Escape from Freedom essentially says that many of us would rather be the victim and forego freedom than to reclaim total freedom for our lives, but with that comes total responsibility as well. And I've always thought that was a very powerful notion, and sadly I think he's probably more right today than he was 30, 40, 50 years ago when he first published the book. So there's a lot of power in that. Now, the other thing that Frankl that I cite Frankl for that's critical for self-actualization is his notion of paradoxical intent. Paradoxical intent is when the very thing we are trying to avoid, we create. And so the whole point in helping people identify their shadow is to help them realize that if they are allowing their fear of failure or fear of rejection or fear of betrayal shadow to drive their behavior, Frankl famously said, the more we fear something, the more likely we are to experience it. And that, to me, that's probably the most powerful insight in the book. I mean, if you really start thinking about what do I fear the most, and if I'm letting that fear drive my behavior, I'm actually increasing the likelihood that I'm going to experience the very thing I'm trying to avoid. And so Carl Jung is often credited with saying this. There's some debate about whether he said it or not, but he's credited with saying it a slightly different way. We meet our destiny on the road we took to avoid it. And by destiny, he means the very thing we were trying to avoid, whether it's failure or rejection or betrayal or whatever else it may be. When we let fear drive our behavior and we're in our shadow, we increase the probability that we're going to experience that very thing, the very thing that we're trying to avoid. So it's a very powerful concept. It requires vulnerability, but it also requires the responsibility that comes with, having a life that is well lived, but one that you take total responsibility for. And that means, I can't blame the person for cutting me off in traffic if I overreact, like an adolescent or, crazed teenager. I have to own that, irrespective of what the context is.
So talk to us, how does Maslow and McClellan fit into this?
Maslow, certainly his work in self-actualization, understanding that, first of all, I think that it's a higher order need. So these other needs, achievement, affiliation, and power, are all deficiency needs. We're trying to meet something that we feel like we're deficient in. They're trying to answer what I call these eternal questions. If you're an achiever, you're trying to satisfy the question of, am I worthy? If you're an affirmer, you're trying to satisfy the eternal question of, am I wanted? And if you're an asserter, you're trying to satisfy the question, am I safe? But in all of those cases, they're deficiency needs, whereas the self-actualization need is a growth need. And so that is where we step out of our ego and we begin to live at a different level. We just transcend some of the things that maybe used to trigger us, and we're more creative. We would rather talk about ideas than people, we kind of get out of the whole criticizing and critiquing others and focus more on ideas that tend to be more creative. We allow that creative side to kick in. And in the full version of the Actualized Leader Profile, I assess what I call the 9 attributes of actualized leaders, and I spent the last 12 or 13 years researching the characteristics of self-actualized individuals. and there were 9 that I found that had a statistically significant correlation with self-actualization. And so all of those 9 come from Abraham Maslow's research. There were 17 he identified in total, and so 8 of those, while I think humility and gratitude, for example, those 2 certainly are a part of being self-actualized, they're not part of the full assessment because they didn't make the 9 cut. But something like peak performance or flow, as we were talking before we went on air with Csikszentmihalyi from the University of Chicago, who certainly added to that concept. Maslow called that a peak experience, and really, in many ways, they were talking about the same thing, although I think Csikszentmihalyi really did a better job of operationalizing it from a perspective. So Maslow is critical for adding that aspect of the not only understanding it as a higher order need, but certainly the 9 attributes and the full ALP assessment all come directly from Maslow.
I got you. So I want to move ahead here because I'm like going, do you know how fast this has gone? This is crazy.
It has gone by fast. Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, we're down to the last 10 minutes or so. I'm like, we even got out of part 1. We haven't got part 1 because this has been a lot. It's been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed this. So let me just jump ahead a little bit here, and
okay, sure.
Let's talk about how our leadership style affects the greater organization.
Yeah, so that's actually going to be the next book. It's going to be Actualized Teamwork, Managing the Shadow Side of Culture. I'm about 2/3 of the way through writing that now, but that goes all the way back to my dissertation research. And essentially, achievers create what I call a detached culture, because if they're shadow achievers and they micromanage, it actually creates the lowest performing culture in a work environment, where there's anger and apathy. And that is the tragic irony that Viktor Frankl was trying to tell us about, that actually the achiever style, if they're a shadow achiever, they're going to create the lowest performing culture, and thereby almost guarantee they're going to experience the failure they're trying to avoid. So the very thing they're trying to do, to micromanage a project or a process or a person to their definition of perfection. And I think that's key. It's to their definition, not some absolute definition.
Right.
Will ultimately create the lowest performing culture. So that's a detached culture. The affirmer style needs to be careful. A shadow affirmer that's avoiding conflict and avoiding difficult conversations and being overly accommodating and maybe spending too much time on relationships and not enough time on performance creates what I call a dramatic culture, and that is a warm and friendly culture on the surface, but beneath the surface there's a high level of frustration because people aren't being held to a certain standard, poor performers are maybe being tolerated and accepted, and that drives down morale for the others. So that's one to be on guard against. And that is the classic trip to Abilene, if any of your listeners know the Abilene paradox. That's when the group is unable to manage agreement that causes their dysfunction. And then the final culture is dependent. And so the asserter style that likes to be in charge and in control, if they're a shadow asserter, they create codependency at home and at work. And that's a culture that's kind of frozen in fear and anxiety. No one wants to upset the boss. Keep your head down, play it safe. And so, it's like a car that's in third gear. You'll get from point A to point B, but you're not going to get the innovation and the creativity and the full hearts and minds of folks because they're afraid to make a mistake or upset the boss. And so you've got different dysfunctions in all three. And so the goal is to not be less of an achiever or less of an affirmer or less of an asserter. At this point, that's kind of who we are, but it's to actualize yourself so that you are an actualized whatever, achiever, affirmer, or asserter. And so you're more in the light, and you avoid. So, for example, an actualized affirmer is someone who is friendly and warm, and they care about you, but they're also direct, they're candid, they call out poor performance, they're not going to tolerate someone who's not doing their fair share, and they will, if there's an elephant in the room, they'll call it out and have a group discussion. And so one of the stories that we hear about in Charlotte back when Mr. Hugh McCall was running Nations Bank and then Bank of America, there were stories of when someone would come in his office and say, Hugh, I'm having an issue with so-and-so. And he would say, okay, sit right there. I'll be right back. And he would go and get so-and-so and bring them into his office and say, sit right there across from this person. Okay, continue with what you were telling me, but tell this person, don't tell me. So, that kind of like just call it out, very transparent culture. So keep the warm and the friendly part because that's who you are at your core, but have the courage of your convictions and not let that shadow kick in. So it's not trying to change who you are, but it's trying to actualize the best of each of those three styles.
We're with Dr. William Sparks here on A New Direction, and the book's called Actualized Leadership. And A New Direction and Dr. Sparks is brought to you by none other than Inline Business Brokers and Advisors. They represent profitable, privately held companies with gross annual revenues in excess of $1 million. Inline delivers the highest market value in the shortest amount of time with complete confidentiality. That is the registered trademark. And so you can learn more about the internationally known Inline Business Brokers and Advisors by going to inline.com. That's ENLIGN.com. And Linda Craft and Team Realtors, no matter where you're at in the world, they can help you sell or buy your home by finding the right professional to help you get whatever you need done in the real estate world. And if you happen to be in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area, in the otherwise known as the Research Triangle Park, RTP, stop in and see them and find out why. For 34 years, they are known as the legends of customer service when it comes to real estate. And you can learn more by going to lindacraft.com. That's www.lindacraft.com. And we thank them for sponsoring A New Direction. And we're back here on A New Direction with author, psychologist. Dude's amazing. His name is Dr. William Sparks. The book's called Actualized Leadership, Meeting Your Shadow and Maximizing Your Potential. And you know what? We're getting so low on time, but I'm just going to keep going. We're just going to grind this thing out because I just got to, because the book's so doggone good. And one of the things as you moved on through this, you actually take us through layers, if you will, of this transformational journey. And you literally take us through one layer after another layer, and we start peeling back the layers. I almost thought it was kind of like an onion as we were doing this transformation. And then we get to the part where we go, okay, now what do we do? How do we practically make that change? And what are some of the practical tips? So I thought maybe what you could do is maybe kind of, I'm not telling you to give away the whole thing, but maybe, let's talk about a few practical things that if you happen to be an achiever or an affirmer or an asserter, what are some practical things that we can do to start beginning this journey of peeling back these onions and onion layers and working through our dark side?
Yeah, so there's a fair amount in the book that goes into that in great detail, and there's some other support materials, worksheets, and a workbook and development guide that are available if someone's interested in really getting serious with this journey. I think that the first thing you have to do is kind of self-assess and know where you are. So, for example, when I talk about being conflict avoidant, that only applies to the affirmer. So for the asserters listening to this program, they're going to go, well, that I'm not conflict avoidant. That doesn't affect me. And they're right. It doesn't. And so I think you have to self-assess and know what your shadow is. However, if you are an asserter, being vulnerable, saying you're sorry, asking for help, not being able to help someone who needs it, those are triggers for that fear of betrayal shadow. So I think you have to start by self-assessing and having an accurate assessment of the shadow you're dealing with. And then for each of them, I talk about what I call the anecdote. So there's a transformational cycle that involves vulnerability, personal responsibility, and forgiveness that is kind of the overall model for that. But then unique to each of the three shadows, there's a specific what I call anecdote to develop. And for the achiever, it's developing a sense of abundance. Achievers really, without realizing it, they're going through life with a very scarce mentality, kind of the scarcity set where it's zero sum. If you win, I lose. There's not enough to go around for everyone. And so if they develop an abundance mentality, it quiets the fear of failure shadow. All of a sudden, wait a minute, there's enough to go around for everyone. I can celebrate someone else winning. That doesn't mean I lose just because they win. And so developing a sense of abundance and gratitude for what you have and where you are, wherever you may be, is really a powerful thing. And so this has just happened to me this afternoon. I mentioned to you I'm moving, and one of my MBA students happened to be driving by my old house as I'm moving stuff out there to the curb to give a few things away. He's riding a bike, and he is an international student from Germany, and was so excited and I was like, no, you can have it. He's, I just have an apartment, I only have a bed, I don't have any furniture. And I said, no, you can have all of this. This is great. And, of course, he's on a bike, so I loaded it up in my car, and I took it over to his apartment. And, it's just this sense of gratitude. And people that are grateful, it doesn't matter what they have or how much they have in their bank account, they're happy. People that just don't have a sense of gratitude, it doesn't matter how much money they have. It doesn't matter what, they're just never happy, and they're never satisfied. And that's something about themselves that they need to explore and address, because there's no amount of material wealth that's going to fix that problem. And so here was, someone who was taking a lamp that I didn't want and a dresser and some other things, and was acting like it was Christmas morning. So gratitude and abundance are critical for the achiever. For the affirmer, it's developing a sense of connection to their purpose. So connection is a little bit misleading. It's not connection to something outside of yourself. It's connection to your purpose inside. And when an affirmer connects to their purpose in life, then they become more able to deal with conflict, to have difficult conversations, and just to be more confident in their own direction. So they rely less on the affirmation of others. And when you do that, you really regain your power. And then for the asserter, it's cultivating a sense of assurance, a sense of safety, a sense of forgiveness, both for yourself and for others that may have wronged you in any way. And developing that sense of assurance and safety, psychological safety, allows asserters to engage with others on a more vulnerable level. Of course, the most watched TED Talk, I think now it's up to 46 million. Brene Brown's classic, The Power of Vulnerability. If your listeners haven't seen that, I highly recommend it. It's 8 or 9 years old now, but it is really kind of calls to question the need to be vulnerable and why the benefits we gain from that. And so I think there's a powerful call to action for the asserters there. So cultivating those three. The one thing I would say, though, Jay, and I think this is as a disclaimer, though, and this applies to all three styles and all three shadows, if you take this journey, you may have those in your life right now that like you where you are, your orbit, whatever that fear orbit is of failure or rejection. An employer may love that you have a fear of failure because they know that you'll stay all night and micromanage the project or do it yourself, and they're taking advantage. An affirmer, you have someone in your orbit who knows you're going to be overly accommodating, and they're going to take advantage of that. And for the asserter, you have others in your orbit that are going to play to your ego and tell you that you're right when on some level you probably know you're wrong. So when we take the work to do this, to actualize our potential and to do the shadow work, there are going to be those in our life often that don't like that. And so we have to have the courage of our convictions to stay true to this path and make the change, knowing that there are those that we may lose along the way who don't have our highest purpose or our highest potential in mind. They like us where we are, and when we choose to live into our highest potential and step into our highest potential, and I know this from personal experience, we may lose some along the way, but we ultimately realize that they liked us where we were, not where we could be.
His name is Dr. William Sparks. The book is called Actualized Leadership. If you did not grow today, you just didn't listen. So you need to just download the podcast. That's just the truth, because that's the truth. Because I always ask, like my guests, which I call my friends, because you and I are going to be friends, because I promise you we're going to get together at some point.
I look forward to it.
It's because we're only a few miles apart, really, in reality, a couple hours apart. Normally I ask my guests, I say to them, I said, if you could leave people with a new direction, based on actualized leadership, what would that be? But I think you just did that.
Yeah, I think for this would actually be the last thing I would say, and this is maybe a little bit, it's sort of the same thing, but it's a little more direct. If you don't manage your shadow, it will manage you. That's it. I mean, there's no other option. There's not a multiple choice. You either have the choice to manage, to meet and process your shadow, integrate it, and begin to walk with it, or it will manage you. And when it manages you, it's going to manage you to a negative outcome that's either less than optimal of what it could be or outright dysfunctional. So we all have that choice. We can any time we can choose to go, you know what, I'm ready to meet it, I'm ready to own it and integrate it. And in that, we reclaim, I think, our ultimate power and step into our brightest light and potential. If we don't, it's going to manage us. We see patterns of dysfunction in our life. We want to blame others, or the stars aren't aligned, or fate's against me. And Jung said it, there's no such thing as fate. It's simply our shadow that has gone unmanaged, unnoticed, unprocessed, and being projected onto others. So, pretty heady kind of stuff to think about, but at the end of the day, either we manage it or it manages us.
Wow. His name's Dr. William Sparks. His book is entitled Actualized Leadership. Buy the book. Get the book. Seriously, get the book. Actualized Leadership, available Kindle, paperback. I'm holding it right up here. Meeting Your Shadow and Maximizing Your Potential. This book is not a game changer. It's a life changer. Okay? And that's what this book is. And you need to get it at Amazon. Go to your local bookstore. Find it. If they don't have it on the shelves, tell them you got to get it. It's that good. And have them put it on the bookshelves. Folks, that's the show. You've listened to A New Direction. And, I got to tell you something. I am so blessed and grateful to have I get amazing guests, and out of nowhere sometimes they just come, and I'm so blown away when I have a guest like Dr. Sparks, and they come into my home and sit at my table and allow me to do this. And I'm so grateful for him, and I'm so grateful for all of you who listen and support the show. And I want to just thank you all over this great world, that from Israel, who downloads the show, to India, to Senegal and Portugal. Thank you all for downloading the show, and in this great country of ours, I thank you as well. So as I say every week, you know what, folks, be inspired, because when you're inspired, that means you can inspire someone else. And when you do that, they in turn can inspire others, and that can make this world a great place. So I look forward to seeing you next week with another great guest. And as I say every week, you know what that is? Ciao, everybody.
The time has come for a new direction. New direction. When you lost your confidence and the answers don't make sense, got to keep your hope alive. You got to know you can survive.